In the winter of 1923, a scandal nearly destroyed the royal house of Caledonia. It wasn't a war or an assassination attempt that brought the monarchy to its knees. It was a lie spoken in a snow-covered stable. When Prince Alistair of Montrose found a shivering, destitute seamstress named Claura burying her past in the straw, he didn't see a pauper. He seen a lifeline. "Pretend to be my wife for Christmas," he begged, desperation in his eyes. But the condition he demanded wasn't just about deception. It was a terrifying contract that would cost Claura her heart, her freedom, and perhaps her very life. The winter of 1923 was the cruelest London had seen in a decade. The fog didn't just sit on the city. It choked it, turning the gas lamps into sickly yellow bruises against the dark. For Claura Vance, the cold wasn't just weather. It was an enemy that lived inside her coat. Claura was 22, though her eyes held the weariness of a woman twice that age. Her fingers, raw and red, clutched a small, battered valise as she navigated the icy cobblestones of the Mews, behind the opulent residence of the Duke of Sutherland. She wasn't supposed to be here. She had been dismissed from her position at the millinery shop 3 days ago, accused of stealing a length of silk she had never touched. Without a reference, without money, and with the rent collector banging on her door, Claura had done the unthinkable. She had snuck into the royal stable seeking warmth. The smell of hay and horseflesh was the most comforting thing she had encountered in weeks. She huddled in the corner of a stall occupied by a massive gray stallion, pulling a horse blanket over her threadbare wool coat. "Just for tonight," she whispered to the horse, whose warm breath misted in the air. "Just until the sun comes up." She drifted into a fitful sleep, dreaming of warmth and bread, only to be jerked awake by the heavy creak of the stable doors. Lantern light slashed across the straw. Claura froze, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. If she were caught, it wouldn't just be eviction, it would be prison. Vagrancy laws were harsh, and trespass on royal-affiliated grounds was worse. "Leave the lantern, Thomas. Go. I need silence." The voice was deep, commanding, and laced with a terrifying amount of agitation. Claura shrank back into the shadows. Through the slats of the stall she saw a man pacing. He was tall, wearing a heavy greatcoat with a fur collar that looked worth more than Claura's entire life. He ran a hand through dark, wind-blown hair. This was Prince Alistair of Montrose, the king's nephew, known in the tabloids as the Bachelor of the Bottle. A man whose reputation for gambling in women was rivaled only by his charm. But tonight, he didn't look charming. He looked hunted. "Damn it all," he hissed, kicking a bucket across the stone floor. The gray stallion in Claura's stall whinnied nervously. Alistair froze. "Who's there?" Claura held her breath, praying the horse would settle. But the prince was already moving, his boots crunching on the straw. He unlatched the stall door and swung the lantern high. The light blinded her. Claura scrambled backward, pressing herself against the rough wood, her hands up in surrender. "Please, sir, I didn't steal anything." "I just needed the warmth." "I'll leave. I swear it." Alistair stared at her. He didn't shout for the guards. He didn't strike her. He just lowered the lantern slowly, his eyes narrowing as he took in her pale face, her large, terrified hazel eyes, and the defiant set of her jaw despite her fear. "You're not an assassin," he muttered, more to himself than her. "Just a stray." "I am not a stray," Claura snapped, her dignity flaring up despite her situation. "I am a seamstress between positions." And I was leaving. She moved to stand, but her legs, numb from the cold, buckled. She would have hit the floor if Alistair hadn't caught her. His grip was firm, his leather gloves cold against her arm, but there was a strange gentleness in how he steadied her. "Easy," he said. He looked at her closely, a strange calculation entering his gaze. It was a look that made Claura's skin prickle, not with fear of violence, but with the sense that she was being measured for something far more dangerous. "What is your name?" "Claura." "Claura Vance." "Well, Claura Vance," Alistair said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Do you believe in fate?" "I believe in hunger and cold, your highness," she replied tartly, recognizing him now. Alistair let out a short, sharp laugh. "Good. You're pragmatic. I need pragmatic." He stepped back, blocking the exit. "I am in a bind, Claura, a bind that could cost me my inheritance, my title, and the estate that supports 300 families in Montrose. My grandfather, the Duke, is dying. He has one wish before he passes on Christmas Eve." Claura watched him warily. "And what is that?" "To see me settled, married, reform my wicked ways." He grimaced. "I told him I was. I lied. I told him I had married a respectable woman from the country, a woman of humble grace, away from the prying eyes of the court." Claura stared at him. "You lied to a dying duke?" "I bought myself time," Alistair snapped, pacing again. "But now he's rallied. He summoned me to the estate for Christmas. He wants to meet my wife. If I show up alone, he cuts me off. The estate gets sold to my cousin, Silas, a man who would evict the tenants and strip the land for coal before the new year." He turned back to her, the lantern light casting long shadows across his face. "I need a wife, Claura, for 2 weeks, just for Christmas." Claura felt the absurdity of the moment wash over her. "You can't be serious. Look at me. I'm nobody. I'm wearing a coat with holes in the elbows. I don't know how to be a princess." "I don't need a princess," Alistair said intensely, stepping closer. "I told him I married a woman of the people, someone real." "You have a fire in you, Claura. I saw it when you snapped at me. I can dress you in silk, I can teach you which fork to use, but I cannot teach someone to have spirit." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a wad of banknotes. It was thicker than a brick. £500. Now, and another 500 when we return. You'll never have to sleep in a stable again. £1,000. It was a fortune. It was security. It was a life. Claura's voice trembled. "It's fraud. It's treason, probably." "It's theater," Alistair corrected. "But there is a condition." The air in the stable seemed to drop 10 degrees. "A condition?" Claura asked. Alistair's face hardened. The desperation was gone, replaced by something cold and impenetrable. "We go there as man and wife. We share a room. We maintain the illusion perfectly, but you must never, under any circumstances, fall in love with me. And you must never ask me about the locked tower on the east wing of the estate. You are a prop, Claura. A very expensive, very well-paid prop. If you break the illusion, or if you pry into my family's secrets, the deal is void, and you will be left with nothing. Do you understand?" Claura looked at the money in his hand, then at the hard line of his mouth. She thought of the freezing wind outside and the emptiness of her future. "I understand," she whispered. "Good," Alistair said. "Then wipe the straw off your coat, Mrs. Montrose. We have a train to catch." The journey to the Montrose estate in Scotland took 2 days. To Claura, it felt like traveling to another planet. She was whisked from the stables to a private townhouse in Mayfair before dawn, where she was bathed, scrubbed, and measured by a silent, stern-faced maid named Mrs. Holloway, who Alistair clearly trusted with his life. By the time they boarded the private train car, Claura Vance the seamstress was gone. In her place was Claura Montrose, wearing a traveling suit of emerald wool that cost more than her father had earned in a lifetime. Alistair sat opposite her as the English countryside blurred into the rugged gray hills of the north. He was drinking brandy, his eyes fixed on the horizon. He had barely spoken to her since the stable, except to give curt instructions on her backstory. She was the daughter of a country parson. They met when Alistair's car broke down in Derbyshire. They married in secret to avoid the press. "You're staring," Alistair said without looking away from the window. "I'm studying," Claura corrected, smoothing her gloves. "If I'm to be your wife, I need to know more than just a lie. What is your grandfather like?" Alistair took a long swallow of his drink. "Duke Edward. He's a lion. Old, scarred, and waiting to bite." He loves me, I think, but he loves the family name more. He believes duty is the only virtue. And your cousin? Silas? Alistair's hand tightened around his glass until his knuckles turned white. Silas is a viper. He's been waiting for me to slip up since we were children. He'll be there, watching you, looking for a crack in the porcelain. If he suspects you're a fraud, he won't just expose us, he'll destroy us. Claura felt a chill that had nothing to do with the winter air. Why do you hate him so much? Beyond the inheritance? That, Alistair said, turning his icy blue gaze on her, is dangerously close to a personal question, Claura. Remember the condition. She fell silent, stung. They arrived at Montrose Hall at dusk on December 18th. The estate was a Gothic masterpiece of stone and shadow, looming over a loch that looked like black glass. Snow swirled around the turrets. As the car pulled up the gravel drive, Claura saw the massive oak doors swing open. A line of servants stood, waiting in the freezing wind. "Chin up," Alistair murmured, reaching over to take her hand. His touch was electric, startling Claura. "You adore me, remember?" "I adore you," she repeated, forcing a smile that felt brittle. They stepped out into the biting wind. An elderly man with a silver-topped cane stood at the center of the reception line. This was Duke Edward. He was frail, his skin like parchment, but his eyes were sharp as flint. Beside him stood a man who could only be Silas. He was thinner than Alistair, with a face that was handsome in a cruel, sharp-edged way. He watched Claura emerge from the car with the intensity of a hawk spotting a field mouse. "Grandfather," Alistair said, his voice booming with forced cheer. He led Claura up the steps. "May I present my wife?" "Claura." The Duke leaned forward, squinting. He took Claura's gloved hand in his trembling ones. For a long, agonizing moment, he said nothing. He just searched her face. Claura fought the urge to curtsy like a servant. She stood tall, meeting his gaze, channeling every ounce of pride she had left. "Not a standard beauty," the Duke rasped, his voice like grinding stones. "But she has good bones. Strong eyes." He looked at Alistair. "She looks like she could handle you, boy. That's a miracle in itself." Alistair laughed, squeezing Claura's hand. "She certainly keeps me in line, sir." "Welcome to Montrose Hall, Claura," Silas said, stepping forward. His voice was smooth, like oil on water. He took her hand from the Duke and kissed it, lingering a second too long. "We have been dying to meet the woman who tamed the wild prince. It must be quite a story." "Is," Claura said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "Though I'm afraid Alistair exaggerates the taming part. I just hide the brandy." The Duke let out a bark of laughter. "I like her. Come inside, come inside. You'll freeze out here." The interior of the hall was a cavern of tapestries, roaring fireplaces, and stag heads mounted on the walls. But as they were led up the grand staircase to the master suite, Claura noticed something unsettling. The servants wouldn't look her in the eye. They scurried away like frightened mice. And then she saw it. At the far end of the east wing corridor, separated from the rest of the house by a heavy iron gate, was a single heavy oak door. No holiday garlands decorated that hallway. No lamps were lit there. It was a mouth of darkness. "The east wing," Silas said softly, appearing suddenly at Claura's elbow as Alistair spoke to the butler. "I see you've noticed our architectural quirk." Claura jumped. "It just looks lonely." "It's not lonely," Silas whispered, a strange smile playing on his lips. "It's occupied. Though Alistair doesn't like to talk about it. Did he tell you about the tragedy, my dear? Or did he leave that out of his courting tales?" "Silas!" Alistair's voice cracked like a whip. He strode over, placing himself physically between Claura and his cousin. His face was pale. "Leave her be. We're tired." Silas held up his hands in mock surrender. "Just making conversation, cousin. Dinner is at 8. Don't be late. Grandfather hates tardiness almost as much as he hates liars. With a final lingering look at Claura, Silas turned and walked away. Alistair grabbed Claura's arm, perhaps a bit too roughly, and steered her into their suite. He slammed the door and locked it. The room was magnificent, dominated by a massive four-poster bed, but Alistair looked like he was in a cage. "Stay away from him," Alistair commanded, pacing the rug. "Do not speak to Silas alone." "He mentioned a tragedy," Claura said, watching him. "He mentioned the East Wing." "He is trying to get inside your head," Alistair shouted, then lowered his voice, running a hand over his face. "Claura, please. We have 12 days until Christmas." 12 days to play this role. Then you take your money and you leave. Don't dig." "It's hard not to dig when you're standing on a grave," Claura said quietly. "Who is in the tower, Alistair?" "No one you need to know," he said. He walked to the dressing-room door. "I'll sleep on the chaise. Take the bed. We have to be down in an hour. Wear the red velvet gown. And Claura?" She looked at him. "You did well with the Duke, thank you." For a second, the mask slipped. Claura saw the exhausted, terrified man beneath the prince. And in that moment, she realized the most dangerous part of this arrangement wasn't Silas, or the lie. It was the fact that she wanted to comfort him. She was already breaking the condition. Dinner that first night was a battlefield disguised as a meal. The dining hall was lit by hundreds of candles, casting flickering shadows against the high vaulted ceiling. The table was long enough to seat 30, but only 4 places were set. The Duke at the head, Silas to his left, and Alistair and Claura to his right. The food was exquisite. Venison in a berry reduction, roasted pheasant, but Claura could barely swallow. Every clink of silverware sounded like a gunshot. "So, Claura," Silas began, swirling his wine, "tell us about your father. The parson, yes? In Derbyshire?" Claura felt Alistair stiffen beside her. She took a sip of water. "Yes, St. Jude's parish. A very small flock, but very devoted." "St. Jude's," Silas mused. "I seem to recall driving through Derbyshire last summer. Charming area. Who is the bishop overseeing that diocese now? Is it still Bishop Hargreaves?" It was a trap. Claura didn't know the names of bishops. She didn't know the ecclesiastical politics of Derbyshire. She felt sweat bead at her hairline. "Bishop Hargreaves retired last year, Silas." Alistair interjected smoothly. "It's Bishop Moore now." "I was asking your wife, Alistair," Silas said, his eyes glittering. "Surely a parson's daughter knows her father's superior?" Claura set her fork down. She turned to Silas, channeling the memory of the haughty customers she used to serve at the millinery shop, women who looked down on everyone. "To be honest, Silas, my father and I rarely discussed church politics at the dinner table. We preferred to discuss literature. He found the bureaucracy of the church stifling, much like this interrogation." The Duke let out a wheezing chuckle. "Ha! She has teeth, Silas. Leave the girl alone. Tell me, Claura, do you hunt?" "No, your grace. I have never held a gun." "A pity," the Duke grunted. "The Boxing Day hunt is a tradition. Alistair is the finest shot in the county." Or he was, before he decided the roulette wheel was more interesting than the rifle. "I still shoot, Grandfather," Alistair said, tightly. "We shall see," the Duke said. "I've organized a small driven shoot for tomorrow morning. Just the family. You'll ride along, Claura. You can watch your husband prove he's still a Montrose." Later that night, the bedroom was quiet. The fire had burned down to embers. Alistair was lying on the chaise lounge, still fully dressed, staring at the ceiling. Claura lay in the massive bed, the silk sheets feeling cold against her skin. "You were good tonight," Alistair said into the darkness. "Silas almost had you." "He knows," Claura whispered. "He doesn't know what he knows, but he smells a lie." "He always does. He's a bloodhound for misery." Claura turned on her side, watching his silhouette. "Why does your grandfather push you so hard?" "Because my father died when I was young," Alistair said, his voice devoid of emotion. "Died in the Great War. I am the spare who became the heir. I was never meant to be the Duke. I was the wild one, the one who liked art and music. Silas. Silas was the one who wanted the power. But he's the cousin, not the direct line. It eats him alive. And the East Wing? Claura risked asking. Is that where your father's ghost lives? Alistair sat up abruptly. Even in the dark, she could feel his glare. Go to sleep, Claura. But Claura couldn't sleep. Around 3 a.m., a sound woke her. It was faint, drifting through the thick stone walls. It sounded like a melody. Someone was humming. A lullaby. It was mournful, high-pitched, and terrifyingly sad. Claura sat up. Alistair was asleep, his breathing heavy. She slipped out of bed, grabbing her silk wrapper. She knew she shouldn't. She knew the rules. But the sound was pulling her. She opened the bedroom door and stepped into the corridor. The hallway was empty. The sound was coming from the end of the hall. Towards the iron gate, Claura walked barefoot on the cold stone. As she approached the east wing, the humming stopped. But now she heard something else, a rhythmic scratching, like metal on stone. Scritch, scritch, scritch. She reached the iron gate. It was locked with a heavy padlock. Through the bars, she looked down the dark corridor to the single oak door. Hello, she whispered. The scratching stopped. Is someone there? From behind the oak door, a voice answered. It wasn't a ghost. It was a woman's voice, raspy and weak, but distinct. Is that you, Alistair? Have you come to let me out? Claura gasped, clapping a hand over her mouth. She backed away, her heart pounding. Alistair? The voice cried out, louder now, cracking with desperation. Don't leave me in the dark again. It's Christmas, Alistair. Please. Claura turned and ran. She sprinted back to the suite, bursting through the door and slamming it shut, leaning against it, gasping for air. Alistair was standing by the fireplace, awake. He held a poker in his hand, his eyes wide. Where were you? He demanded. I heard singing, Claura stammered. In the east wing. There's a woman there, Alistair. Who is she? She called your name. Alistair dropped the poker. It clattered loudly on the hearth. He looked defeated, his shoulders slumping. He walked over to her, grabbing her shoulders. You went to the gate? Did anyone see you? Did Silas see you? No, but Alistair, she sounds... She is mad, Alistair said, his voice shaking. She is insane, Claura. That is why she is locked away. For her safety and ours. Who is she? Alistair looked into Claura's eyes, and for the first time, Claura saw tears in his. She is my mother. Claura froze. Your mother? The princess? But everyone says she died in a sanatorium in Switzerland 10 years ago. Another lie, Alistair whispered. The Montrose family is built on lies, Claura. She lost her mind when my father died. She became violent, dangerous. Grandfather refused to send her away to an asylum where the press would find out. So he kept her here, a prisoner in her own home. I am the only one she recognizes, and even then, sometimes she tries to hurt me. He released Claura, turning away. That is the secret. That is the shame. Silas knows, of course. He uses it. He tells Grandfather that the madness runs in my blood, that I am unfit to lead because one day I will end up behind a locked door too. Claura looked at the broken man before her. The arrogant prince was gone. In his place was a son terrified of his own genetics, trapped in a house of secrets. Without thinking, Claura crossed the room and wrapped her arms around him from behind, pressing her cheek against his back. He stiffened, then slowly relaxed, his hands coming up to cover hers. I won't tell, she whispered. I promise. You should leave, Alistair murmured. Take the money and go. This house is cursed. We have a deal, Claura said firmly. And I don't break contracts. I'm staying until Christmas. Alistair turned in her arms, looking down at her. The air between them shifted, charged with a sudden, intense intimacy. He leaned down, his face inches from hers. "You are a fool, Claura Vance," he breathed. "I know," she said. He almost kissed her. She saw his gaze drop to her lips. But then he pulled back, stepping away as if burned. "Get some sleep," he said roughly. "Tomorrow is the hunt, and Silas will be out for blood." The morning of the hunt dawned not with the sun, but with a gray, suffocating light that barely pierced the fog rolling off the loch. The air was so cold it felt like inhaling broken glass. Claura stood in the courtyard, her breath pluming in the air. She was dressed in a tweed riding habit that Mrs. Halloway had pinched and tucked to fit her slender frame. It was beautiful, but to Claura it felt like armor. Horses stamped their hooves on the frozen cobblestones, the sound echoing like gunfire. Beagles bayed in their pens, eager for the scent of blood. Nervous? Claura turned to see Silas mounting a massive black gelding. He looked entirely in his element, predatory and sharp. He held a shotgun broken over his arm, the metal gleaming dully. "I am merely cold, Silas." Claura lied, keeping her chin high. In truth, she was terrified. She had never ridden a horse in her life. Alistair had given her a crash course in the stables at 5 a.m., holding her waist as she wobbled in the saddle, whispering instructions on how to hold the reins. Knees tight. Heels down. Don't let the beast know you're afraid. "It's a dangerous sport," Silas said, looking down at her. "Accidents happen on the moors. The ground is uneven. Guns go off unexpectedly. One must be very sure of one's footing." "Is that a threat, cousin?" Alistair's voice cut through the fog. He rode up on the gray stallion from the London stables, the same horse Claura had slept beside. He looked magnificent and terrifying, a prince of winter. He steered his horse between Claura and Silas, cutting off the conversation. "Claura will ride with me," Alistair announced. "She prefers the view from the rear of the pack." "As you wish." Silas smirked, wheeling his horse around. "Try to keep up." The hunt was a brutal affair. The party moved out onto the high moors, a desolate landscape of heather and granite. The wind whipped Claura's face, stinging her eyes. She clung to the reins of her mare, a gentle chestnut named Bess, praying she wouldn't fall. Alistair stayed close to her flank. Every time she slipped or looked panicked, he was there, his presence a silent anchor. "You're doing fine," he shouted over the wind. "Just breathe." "I hate this," she shouted back. "It's barbaric." "It's tradition," he replied, though he didn't look like he was enjoying it either. His eyes were constantly scanning the horizon, watching Silas. By mid-morning, the party had split up. The Duke had retired to the carriage to drink warm sherry, leaving the younger generation to flesh out the grass. Claura found herself separated from the main group, guiding Bess through a narrow ravine. Alistair had ridden ahead to chase a stray dog. Suddenly, the shot rang out. It was close, deafeningly close. Claura's mare reared up, screaming in panic. Claura lost her stirrups. The world spun. Sky, heather, stone, and she hit the frozen ground with a bone-jarring thud. Pain exploded in her shoulder. She lay there, gasping, the wind knocked out of her. "Claura!" She heard hooves thundering towards her. Alistair was there in seconds, leaping from his moving horse. He fell to his knees beside her in the mud, his face pale with terror. "Don't move," he commanded, his hands hovering over her. "Where are you hurt?" "My shoulder," she gasped. The horse spooked. "I heard the shot." Alistair growled, looking up at the ridge. It came from the left flank. That was Silas's position. "He shot at me?" Claura whispered, the horror of it sinking in. "He shot near you." Alistair corrected, his jaw tight. "To spook the horse. To make you fall. He wants you injured. He wants you weak." He scooped her up into his arms. Claura let out a cry of pain, and Alistair flinched as if he were the one hurt. "I've got you." he murmured, pulling her against his chest. "I've got you, Claura. I won't let him touch you again." He didn't put her back on her horse. Instead, he lifted her onto the front of his saddle, mounting behind her. He wrapped his heavy coat around her, enclosing her in his warmth, his arms acting as a cage against the world. The ride back to the hall was slow. Claura leaned back against him, feeling the steady beat of his heart against her back. The adrenaline was fading, leaving her shivering. "Why?" she asked quietly. "Why does he hate you so much? It can't just be the title." Alistair was silent for a long time. The only sound was the crunch of hooves on snow. "Because of a woman," he said finally. "Years ago, before I was the bachelor of the bottle. Her name was Eleanor. Silas loved her, obsessively. But Eleanor, she favored me." "Did you love her?" "No," Alistair admitted. "I was young and vain. I flirted with her because I could. Because I knew it annoyed Silas. I didn't know how fragile she was. When I rejected her, she took a bottle of sleeping pills." Claura gasped. "She survived," Alistair said quickly. "But she was sent away. Silas never forgave me. He believes I destroy everything I touch. He believes I drove Eleanor to madness, just like my mother." His arms tightened around Claura. "And he is right. That is why you must leave, Claura. The moment the charade is over. I am toxic." Claura twisted in the saddle, ignoring the pain in her shoulder, to look at him. His eyes were full of self-loathing. "You saved me in the stable," she said fiercely. "You saved me just now. That is not the work of a toxic man." Alistair looked down at her, the wind tossing his dark hair. For a moment, the prince and the pauper vanished. They were just a man and a woman, bound by a lie that was feeling increasingly like the only truth that mattered. "You are dangerous, Mrs. Montrose," he whispered. "You make me want to be a better man, and that is the most dangerous thing of all." Claura's injury was declared a sprain, though her shoulder was bruised black and blue. The Duke, surprisingly, was furious at the accident. He scolded the gamekeeper for an hour and ordered Silas to check his gun sights, implying incompetence. Silas took the dressing down with a tight, poisonous smile, his eyes never leaving Claura. 2 days passed. The house was being prepared for the Christmas Eve ball, the highlight of the social season. Servants were draping garlands of holly and ivy over every banister. The smell of cinnamon, cloves, and roasting meat permeated the air. But the festive atmosphere stopped dead at the iron gate of the East Wing. Claura couldn't shake the memory of the voice. "It's Christmas, Alistair." On the afternoon of December 22nd, Alistair was summoned to the village to deal with a tenant dispute, a task Silas usually handled, but the Duke had insisted Alistair take on. It was a test of his responsibility. Claura was left alone in the vast library. She was supposed to be resting, but her mind was racing. She began to wander the shelves, pulling down heavy, leather-bound ledgers. She wasn't looking for literature. She was looking for answers. She found the estate accounts. She had a head for numbers. Working in a shop required it. She opened the ledger for 1913, the year Alistair's mother was supposedly sent to Switzerland. She traced the columns. Payments to doctors. Payments for specialized care. But the payments didn't go to a Swiss sanatorium. They went to a Dr. Aris Thorne, a local name. She flipped forward to the current year. The payments to Dr. Thorne were still ongoing. Massive sums. Consultation fees. Sedatives. Interesting reading material? Claura slammed the book shut. Silas was leaning against the doorway, holding a crystal tumbler of whiskey. He moved into the room with the grace of a stalking cat. "I was just looking at the history of the estate," Claura stammered. "The numbers don't lie," Silas said, walking over to the desk. He reached out and touched the cover of the ledger. "Unlike people. Tell me, Claura. Or is it Claura?" Claura's blood ran cold. Silas pulled a folded piece of paper from his pocket. He placed it gently on the desk. It was a telegram. "I have a friend at Scotland Yard," Silas said pleasantly. "I asked him to look into the marriage license of Prince Alistair. Curiously, he couldn't find one. Not in Derbyshire. Not in London." He leaned in, his face inches from hers. She could smell the expensive whiskey and the faint scent of gun oil. "Who are you?" he hissed. "A prostitute he picked up in Soho, an actress down on her luck. You certainly aren't a parson's daughter. You hold your fork like a commoner when you think no one is watching." Claura stood up, her legs shaking. "I am Alistair's wife in the eyes of God." "Paperwork gets lost, Silas. Especially during the war." "A valiant attempt," Silas laughed softly, "but futile. Here is what is going to happen. Tomorrow night is the ball. You will attend, you will smile. And then, just before the midnight toast, you will announce that you are leaving Alistair. You will tell the Duke that Alistair has been unfaithful, that he has relapsed into gambling. You will destroy his reputation so thoroughly that grandfather will have no choice but to disinherit him." "I won't do it," Claura said. "If you don't," Silas said, his voice dropping to a whisper, "I will have you arrested for fraud. I will have the police waiting at the gates. You'll spend Christmas in a cell, Claura. And Alistair, I'll make sure the press finds out he hired a whore to fool a dying war hero. It will destroy the monarchy." He straightened up, finishing his drink. "Think about it, my dear. You have until the first waltz." Silas walked out, leaving Claura alone in the library. The silence of the room felt like a scream. She looked at the telegram. She looked at the ledger. Silas had them cornered. But as she stared at the name Dr. Eris Thorne in the ledger, a thought struck her. Silas was blackmailing her to destroy Alistair. But Silas was also paying a doctor a fortune to keep Alistair's mother sedated. If Silas exposed Claura, he won. If Claura exposed Silas, she didn't know if she could. But she knew one thing. She wasn't just a prop anymore. She was falling in love with the prince, and she would burn down the world before she let Silas win. Claura waited until midnight. The house was asleep. Alistair hadn't returned from the village. The roads were snowed in, a servant had said. He was staying at the inn. Claura was on her own. She dressed in her darkest clothes. She took a heavy iron poker from the fireplace, and then she went to the kitchen. She found the ring of keys hanging by the butler's pantry. It was a gamble, but she remembered seeing Mrs. Halloway use a large brass key for the wine cellar and a long, slender iron key for the east wing gate when she brought food trays up. Claura took the iron key. Her footsteps were silent on the stairs. The house groaned in the wind, masking her movements. She reached the iron gate of the east wing. Her hands trembled as she inserted the key. Click! The lock sprang open. Claura slipped through, locking it behind her. The air in the corridor was stale, smelling of dust and lavender. She walked to the oak door at the end of the hall. "Hello?" she whispered, knocking softly. There was a scuffling sound inside. Then the voice. "Is it time for my medicine?" "I don't want it, Silas. It makes the fog come." Claura's heart broke. "It's not Silas," she said through the wood. "My name is Claura. I'm a friend of Alistair." The door wasn't locked. It was bolted from the outside. Claura slid the heavy bolt back. She pushed the door open. The room was surprisingly well furnished, filled with velvet cushions and expensive dolls. But the windows were barred. In the center of the room, sitting in a rocking chair, was a woman who looked like a faded photograph of Alistair. Princess Helena was thin, her hair gray and wild, but her eyes were lucid. She looked up at Claura with a mix of fear and hope. "Alistair sent you?" Helena asked. He told me you were here," Claura said, stepping inside. "Your Highness, why does Silas give you medicine?" Helena laughed, a brittle sound. "To keep me quiet, to keep me confused. If I am confused, I cannot tell Edward." "Tell the Duke what?" Claura knelt beside the chair. "What is the secret, Your Highness?" Helena leaned forward, gripping Claura's arm with surprising strength. "The fire. The fire in the stables 10 years ago. The one that killed the prize horses. Claura nodded. She had heard the servants whisper about it. Silas started it, Helena whispered. He was drunk. He dropped the lantern. He wanted to blame the groom. I saw him. I saw him run away. I told him I would tell Edward. Silas, he told Edward the first, was hallucinating. He told Edward the grief for my husband had broken my mind. He brought Dr. Thorne. The needles, they make your thoughts turn to soup. Claura felt a wave of nausea. Silas hadn't just imprisoned her. He had chemically lobotomized her to cover up a mistake. He had stolen 10 years of her life and convinced Alistair that madness was in his blood. We have to get you out, Claura said, standing up. No, Helena shrank back. He'll hurt Alistair. He always says he'll hurt Alistair if I speak. He's trying to destroy Alistair anyway, Claura said, her voice hard. Tonight, we fight back. Claura heard a noise behind her, a slow, sarcastic clapping. She spun around. Silas stood in the doorway. He wasn't smiling anymore. He held a small pistol in his hand. Very clever, Claura, he said, stepping into the room. I underestimated you. I thought you were just a street rat. Turns out you're a detective. Let her go, Silas, Claura said, standing in front of Helena. I'm afraid I can't do that. Silas sighed. You've seen too much. And Alistair isn't here to save you this time. He raised the gun. It's a tragedy, really. The mad princess attacked the new bride in a fit of jealousy. A struggle ensued. Both fell out of the window. The rocks below are so unforgiving. Claura looked at the barred window, then at the poker she had dropped by the door, too far away. You won't get away with it, Claura said, her voice shaking. I always do, Silas replied. He cocked the hammer of the gun. Say your prayers, Mrs. Montrose. Crash! The window behind Silas shattered inward. Not the barred window of the tower, but the skylight in the hallway outside. Snow and glass rained down. Silas spun around, distracted. Claura didn't hesitate. She lunged, not for the poker, but for Silas. She tackled him around the waist, driving him backward into the hallway. The gun went off. The bullet tore into the ceiling. Claura and Silas crashed to the floor. He was stronger, heavier. He threw her off, striking her across the face. Claura tasted blood. Silas scrambled up, pointing the gun at her again. You stupid bitch! Silas! The roar came from the end of the corridor. Alistair stood at the iron gate. He was soaked, covered in snow, panting heavily. He must have ridden through the storm. He saw the gun. He saw Claura on the floor, bleeding. Alistair didn't yell. He didn't bargain. He simply tore the iron gate off its hinges. The metal screamed and twisted as he threw his shoulder against the weakened lock mechanism, fueled by a rage that wasn't human. Silas fired. The bullet hit Alistair in the shoulder, spinning him around. No! Claura screamed. But Alistair didn't fall. He stumbled, righted himself, and kept coming. His eyes were black with fury. Silas, for the first time in his life, looked terrified. He fired again, but the gun clicked empty. Alistair collided with him like a freight train. He drove Silas into the stone wall, the impact sickeningly loud. He punched him, once, twice, 3 times, until Silas slumped to the floor, unconscious. Alistair stood over him, chest heaving, blood dripping from his left arm onto the stone. Claura scrambled to her feet and ran to him. Alistair, you're shot! He didn't seem to feel it. He looked past her, into the room. Helena was standing in the doorway. She looked at the bleeding man. Alistair, she whispered. My baby? Alistair fell to his knees. Mother? Claura watched as the mother and son, separated by a decade of lies and iron bars, collapsed into each other's arms. But the moment was short-lived. From the stairs they heard heavy footsteps. What is the meaning of this? Duke Edward stood at the end of the hall, surrounded by servants with lanterns. He looked at the broken gate. He looked at Silas unconscious on the floor. He looked at Alistair bleeding. And then he looked at Helena. The Duke's face went white. He clutched his chest, swaying. "Helena!" he gasped. "But Silas said you were dead. He said you died last week." "Silas lied," Claura said, stepping forward, her voice ringing out in the corridor. She pointed a trembling finger at the unconscious man. "He lied about everything." The silence that followed Claura's accusation was heavier than the stone walls of Montrose Hall. Duke Edward stood trembling, his gaze shifting from the unconscious form of his grandson Silas to the weeping woman in Alistair's arms. "Is it true?" the Duke whispered, his voice cracking. He looked at Alistair, who was clutching his bleeding shoulder, his face gray with pain but his eyes burning with defiance. "He kept her drugged, grandfather," Alistair rasped. "He paid Dr. Thorne to keep her silent. He told you she was dead so you wouldn't look for her. And he told me she was mad so I would fear her. He played us all." The Duke walked slowly toward Helena. He reached out a shaking hand to touch her cheek. Helena flinched, then looked up, her eyes clearing through the haze of years. "Edward," she whispered. "He hurt the horses. I told you." The Duke let out a sound that was half sob, half roar. He turned to the head of the household guard. "Lock Silas in the wine cellar! Send for the sheriff! And send for Dr. Thorne, in irons." As the servants scrambled to obey, dragging the groaning Silas away, the Duke turned to Claura. He looked at the blood on her face, the fierce set of her jaw, and the way she stood protectively near Alistair. "And you," the Duke said softly, "you are not a parson's daughter, are you?" Claura straightened her spine. The adrenaline was fading, leaving her exhausted. "No, Your Grace, I am a seamstress. I was homeless. Alistair hired me to save your Christmas. I am a fraud." Alistair struggled to stand. "Grandfather, don't." "Quiet, boy," the Duke commanded, though his tone was gentle. He looked at Claura with a strange, weary respect. "You may be a fraud, my dear, but you are the only one in this room who had the courage to tell the truth when it mattered. You saved my family." He gestured to the maids. "Get the prince to a bed, call the surgeon, and get this young woman a warm bath and a brandy. Tonight, we survive. Tomorrow, we reckon." The next morning, Christmas Eve, dawned bright and blindingly white. The storm had passed. Claura sat in her room, her suitcase packed. The house was quiet. Silas was gone, taken away by the authorities in the dead of night. Dr. Thorne had been arrested. Helena was settled in the Duke's own suite, attended to by nurses who were actually kind. Order had been restored. The play was over. Claura looked at the envelope on the dressing table. It contained the second installment of £500. A fortune, enough to open her own shop, enough to never be cold again. She left it there. She picked up a pen and wrote a quick note. "Dear Alistair, the deal was that I would play the part until Christmas, but the condition was that I must not fall in love. I have failed. I cannot take the money because I broke the contract. You don't need a pretend wife anymore. You have your mother, and you have your honor back. Goodbye, Claura." She slipped down the servants' stairs, avoiding the main hall. She walked the 3 miles to the village train station in the freezing snow, her heart breaking with every step. The station was empty save for the station master. The London train was due in 10 minutes. Claura bought a third-class ticket with the last of her own coins. She stood on the platform, shivering, watching the steam rise from the tracks. She heard the whistle in the distance. The train was coming to take her back to her life of gray wool and lonely nights. "Claura!" The shout was carried on the wind. She turned. Galloping down the snowy road toward the station was not a carriage, but a horse. The gray stallion. Alistair was riding like a madman, his left arm in a sling, holding the reins with his good hand. He didn't slow down as he reached the platform. He practically slid the horse to a halt, snow spraying over the fence. He slid off, stumbling in the snow, breathless and pale. He was wearing a hasty mix of clothes, boots, breeches, and a shirt unbuttoned at the collar, with a heavy cloak thrown over his shoulders. "You left," he accused, scrambling onto the platform. "You just left." "The job is done," Claura said, gripping her valise tight to stop her hands from shaking. "You have your inheritance. Silas is gone. You don't need me." "I read the note," Alistair said, stepping closer. The train whistle blew again, louder this time. The engine chugged into view, a massive iron beast slowing down. "Then you know why I had to go," Claura said, tears stinging her eyes. "I broke the condition. I fell in love with you. A prince cannot be with a seamstress who—" "To hell with the prince," Alistair shouted, grabbing her arm with his good hand. "And to hell with the condition. Alistair, let me go. The train. I don't want a pretend wife, Claura." He pulled her toward him, wincing as his wounded shoulder jarred, but refusing to let go. "I spent 10 years pretending I didn't care, pretending I was happy, pretending I wasn't terrified of the madness in my blood. You are the first real thing that has happened to me in a decade." The train screeched to a halt behind her. Doors opened. Passengers began to disembark. "I am a nobody," Claura whispered. "I was sleeping in your stable 3 weeks ago." "And now you are the woman who saved my life," Alistair said fiercely. He reached into his pocket. He didn't pull out money. He pulled out a ring, a heavy, ancient thing of gold and sapphire. "This was my grandmother's," he said. "Grandfather gave it to me this morning. He told me that if I let you get on this train, he would disinherit me for being a fool, not for being a bachelor." Claura stared at the ring, then up at his blue eyes, which were wide and pleading. "Marry me," Alistair begged. "For real this time. No contracts, no conditions. Just be with me. Be my wife for Christmas, and for every Christmas after that." "People will talk," Claura said, a smile finally breaking through her tears. "They'll say the prince married a pauper." "Let them talk." Alistair grinned, the old charm returning, but tempered now with genuine warmth. "We'll give them a story they'll never believe." He kissed her then, right there on the platform, amidst the steam and the snow and the gawking passengers. It wasn't a stage kiss. It was desperate and warm and full of promise. "I love you," Claura whispered against his lips. "I know," Alistair murmured. "I intend to spend the rest of my life making sure you never regret it." He took her valise and tossed it into the snow. Then he took her hand and led her back toward the horse, back toward the castle, and back toward the first real Christmas of their lives. And so, the scandal that threatened to destroy the House of Montrose became its greatest triumph. Claura Vance didn't just win the heart of a prince. She healed a broken family and exposed a darkness that had festered for a decade. Their story reminds us that sometimes the lies we tell to protect ourselves are the very things that keep us from happiness, and that nobility isn't found in bloodlines, but in courage. If you enjoyed this dramatic retelling of Alistair and Claura's Christmas romance, please give this video a thumbs up to support the channel. We have many more historical secrets and forbidden romances to share with you. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss a part of the story. What did you think of Silas's betrayal? Let us know in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next video.